My wife's best friend texted me. She's having second thoughts. You should offer to pay for her dream car to reassure her. I replied, understood. Then I canceled the wedding venue, citing extortion as the reason. The non-refundable deposit was all in her name. Look, I'm not the kind of guy who wakes up expecting his life to implode before he's even finished his first cup of coffee, but apparently Monday had other plans for me. There I was, sitting at my kitchen table in my boxer shorts and that ratty college t-shirt I refuse to throw away because it's broken imperfectly, scrolling through what I can only describe as the ninth circle of hell disguised as an Excel spreadsheet. Wedding planning, folks. The modern equivalent of voluntary waterboarding, except somehow more expensive and with worse music choices. My fiancée Melanie had color-coded everything, and I mean everything, from napkin rings to the exact shade of ivory for the table runners, which apparently is completely different from cream, off-white, or eggshell. Who knew white had a whole damn family tree? I was 3 tabs deep into floral arrangements versus budget reality when my phone buzzed, and I figured it was probably Mel sending me another Pinterest board of centerpieces that all looked identical to my untrained, clearly unsophisticated male eyes. But no, it was Tanya, Melanie's best friend since college, the kind of woman who says, I'm brutally honest, as if that's a personality trait and not just an excuse to be an asshole with a smile. Tanya, who wore those giant sunglasses indoors and ordered oat milk lattes with such aggressive specificity that baristas probably drew her face on dartboards in the break room. The text read, Hey Lucas, I need to talk to you about something. Don't tell Mel I reached out. My immediate thought, and I'm being completely honest here, was that she probably needed help coordinating the bachelorette party, or maybe she wanted to know Mel's ring size for some bridesmaid gift nonsense. Or hell, perhaps she needed advice on whether rose gold or champagne pink napkins would better complement the fall aesthetic Mel had been obsessing over for 6 months straight. Spoiler alert, I was so catastrophically wrong that I should probably never trust my instincts again. I mean, I once thought Crocs would never catch on, so clearly my judgment is suspect. I took another sip of my coffee, the good stuff, not that fancy pour-over garbage that tastes like someone filtered it through a gym sock, and watched those 3 little dots appear and disappear like Tanya was writing a dissertation instead of a text message. Finally, the words materialized on my screen, and I swear I felt my soul leave my body and hover somewhere near the ceiling fan, looking down at poor, naive Lucas who still thought today would be normal. Mel's having second thoughts, Tanya typed, and I could practically hear her voice, that weird vocal fry thing she does when she's about to drop some truth bomb that nobody asked for. She loves you, but she's not sure you can give her the life she deserves. Oh, fantastic. Absolutely spectacular. For years of relationship loyalty, of remembering anniversaries and pretending to care about her friend's drama, and watching every single episode of whatever reality TV show she was obsessed with that week. And suddenly my 2018 Toyota Camry, which runs perfectly fine, thank you very much, is apparently a deal breaker. The life she deserves? What does that even mean? I'm a software developer with a stable job, a 401k, and I've never once forgotten to put the toilet seat down. I thought that was the dream, but apparently I missed the memo about needing to roll up in a luxury vehicle to prove my worth as a human being. But wait, there's more. Tanya wasn't done destroying my Monday morning. If you really love her, she continued, and I could feel my blood pressure rising with each word. Offer to pay for her dream car, a Mercedes. That would reassure her. I'm sorry, what? Did I just read that correctly? This woman, who I've tolerated at countless dinners where she talked over everyone and made everything about herself, just suggested I drop, what, $40, $50, $60,000 on a car to prove my love? Like I'm some kind of ATM with feelings? Like my entire value as a partner can be reduced to whether or not I can finance German engineering. I sat there, staring at my phone, watching the steam rise from my coffee mug, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly. Not even hurt. It was more like clarity, the kind you get when you suddenly realize you've been reading the map upside down this entire time, and now everything makes a horrifying kind of sense. All those little comments Mel had been making about her coworkers' engagement rings, about how nice it must be to vacation in Europe instead of road tripping to national parks, about how her friend Jessica's boyfriend just bought her a designer handbag, just because. They weren't idle observations. They were test balloons, trial runs, the slow, creeping realization that I was being evaluated not on who I was, but on what I could provide, hit me like a freight train made of disappointment and expensive car payments. I could have done a lot of things in that moment. I could have called Mel immediately, demanded an explanation, started a fight that would have lasted hours and solved nothing. I could have confronted Tanya, told her to mind her own damn business and stay out of my relationship. I could have panicked, maybe even considered whether I should actually look into financing options for a Mercedes, because that's what people do when they're desperate to save something they've invested years into, right? They compromise. They bend. They pretend that financial extortion disguised as relationship advice is somehow normal. But instead, I did something that surprised even me. I took another long, deliberate sip of my coffee, set the mug down with the kind of calm that usually precedes either enlightenment or a complete mental breakdown, stared at Tanya's messages, and simply replied with one word: understood. Just that. Nothing else. No questions, no arguments, no desperate attempts to defend myself or negotiate or ask what the hell kind of twisted logic made anyone think this was okay. Just understood, like I was confirming a meeting time or acknowledging a weather report. And then I smiled. Not a sad smile, or a bitter one, or even an angry one. No, this was the smile of a man who just realized he's been playing a rigged game and has finally decided to flip the entire table over. This was the smile of someone who just found the big red self-destruct button on a relationship that was apparently held together by financial expectations and luxury car requirements, and who decided, you know what? Let's see what happens when I press this thing. Because if 4 years of genuine love, partnership, and building a life together could be undermined by a text message suggesting I wasn't good enough without a Mercedes in the driveway, then maybe, just maybe, this whole wedding thing needed to be reevaluated. And by reevaluated, I mean burned to the ground and salt poured over the ashes. I finished my coffee, cracked my knuckles like I was about to write the world's most important email, and opened my contacts. Time to make some calls. Starting with the wedding venue. The wedding venue was first on my hit list, and let me tell you, there's something deeply satisfying about making a phone call when you know you're about to ruin someone's entire day with completely justified chaos. I dialed the number for Riverside Gardens, which, by the way, wasn't even near a river, just had a decorative fountain that looked like it came from a suburban shopping mall, and waded through their hold music, some classical piano garbage that was probably meant to sound elegant, but just made me want to stick forks in my ears. Finally, a chirpy voice answered, the kind of professionally fake cheerfulness that comes from years of dealing with stressed-out brides and their even more stressed-out credit cards. Riverside Gardens, this is Jennifer speaking. How may I help you create your perfect day? She sang, and I almost felt bad for what I was about to do. Almost. Hi, Jennifer. This is Lucas Rivers, I said, using my most professional, I'm definitely not about to blow up my entire life voice. I need to cancel our booking for October 21st. The pause that followed was so long, I actually checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then came the gasp, this dramatic inhale like I'd just told her I was planning to sacrifice a goat on their decorative fountain. Oh no. Oh my goodness, why? Is everything okay? The deposit is non-refundable, you know. It's in the contract you signed. She was spiraling, and I got it. Someone canceling a wedding probably meant her commission was about to evaporate faster than my relationship apparently had. Please list the reason for cancellation as financial extortion concerns, I said, enunciating each word like I was teaching English as a second language to someone who really needed to understand the assignment. Dead silence. Not even breathing. I wondered if Jennifer had actually fainted and was lying on the floor of her tastefully decorated office surrounded by wedding brochures and shattered dreams. Excuse me, she finally managed, her voice climbing about 3 octaves into dog whistle territory. Could you repeat that? Oh, I could definitely repeat that. In fact, I was about to repeat it so many times today that it would become my personal mantra, my battle cry, my new favorite phrase to replace I love you in my daily vocabulary. Financial extortion concerns, I said again, slower this time, really savoring each syllable. That's FINANCIAL, extortion. With AT, concerns. CUNCRNS. Would you like me to spell it again, or are we good? I could practically hear her brain short-circuiting through the phone, trying to figure out if this was some kind of prank or if she needed to call her manager or maybe the police. I'll make a note of that in your file, Mr. Rivers, she said, her cheerfulness completely demolished and replaced with the confused monotone of someone whose training manual definitely didn't cover this scenario. You'll receive a confirmation email within 24 hours. Perfect. One down, approximately 17 vendors to go. The caterer was next on my destruction tour, and this call was somehow even better because the guy who answered, Marco, with an accent that was definitely fake because I'd met him before and he was from New Jersey, actually tried to talk me out of it. But Lucas, my friend, we have prepared such a beautiful menu for you. The herb-crusted salmon, the vegetarian Wellington, the chocolate fountain. Yeah, Marco, the chocolate fountain that cost $800 and that Mel insisted we needed because her cousin had won at her wedding and apparently we were in some kind of culinary arms race I wasn't aware of. Marco, I appreciate the sales pitch, really, but I need to cancel. Reason, financial extortion concerns. He didn't even ask me to clarify, just sighed like he'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. You young people and your drama, he muttered, which was rich coming from a guy who once called me in tears because the flower vendor delivered peonies instead of roses and it was going to ruin the aesthetic synergy of his table settings. I'll process the cancellation. You lose the deposit. Wouldn't expect anything less, I said cheerfully, because honestly at this point the money was just numbers on a screen and my pride was worth way more than whatever we'd already sunk into this disaster. The DJ was surprisingly cool about the whole thing, actually. I called Beats by Brandon. Yes, that was really his business name. And yes, he had it printed on a bedazzled baseball cap, and explained the situation using my new favorite phrase. Brandon actually laughed, this genuine belly laugh that made me like him way more than I had during our awkward consultation where he'd played us 30 seconds of about 400 songs while Mel took notes like she was studying for the bar exam. Damn, man, that's cold, he said, but I could hear the grin in his voice. Financial extortion concerns. That's a new one. You okay though? Like, for real. It was the first time anyone had asked me that all day, and honestly it kind of threw me off my vengeful rampage for a second. Yeah, Brandon, I'm good. Better than good, actually. I'm liberated. Hell yeah, man. Well, I'm sorry about the wedding, but hey, you ever need a DJ for like a divorce party or a freedom celebration or whatever, I got you. First hours on the house. See, this is why I liked Brandon. The man understood the assignment and offered value-added services. I made a mental note to leave him a good review online because that's just good karma. The florist was a middle-aged woman named Patricia who ran her business out of a converted garage and took her flower arrangements more seriously than most people take their marriages, which in retrospect was probably a red flag I should have noticed earlier. You're canceling? She asked, her voice dripping with judgment and what I'm pretty sure was actual grief. Do you know how many hours I've spent designing your arrangements? The cascading orchids alone took 3 consultation sessions. Patricia, I sincerely apologize for wasting your orchid expertise, but I need to cancel. The reason is financial extortion concerns. She made this noise, like a wounded animal mixed with a tea kettle, and I genuinely couldn't tell if she was more upset about losing the job or about the flowers that would never fulfill their destiny of sitting on tables while drunk relatives argued about politics. This is highly irregular, she sniffed, which was hilarious because nothing about this day was regular at all. This was premium, top-shelf irregularity, the kind you can't even find at specialty stores. I'll send you the paperwork, but Mr. Rivers, I want you to know that you're breaking those flowers' hearts. I didn't even know how to respond to that, so I just said thank you and hung up, wondering if Patricia was okay or if she needed to have a grief counseling session with her unsold orchids. By the time I got to the photographer, some hipster dude named Tyler who exclusively shot on film because digital was too commercial, even though he charged commercial prices, I had my cancellation speech down to a science. I could have done it in my sleep, probably did do it in my dreams that night, honestly. Tyler, it's Lucas Rivers. I need to cancel our October booking. Bro, what? But I already blocked out the whole day. I turned down 3 other weddings for you guys. Yeah, Tyler, and I turned down basic sanity and self-respect to plan this wedding. So we're all making sacrifices here. Financial extortion concerns, I said, not even bothering with the spelling bee routine anymore, because I was getting tired, and frankly Tyler seemed like the kind of guy who probably wouldn't write it down correctly anyway. He tried to argue, something about artistic integrity and lost opportunities, but I just let him vent while I made myself a sandwich because it was past noon and I'd been on the phone for 3 hours straight canceling my future. Eventually, he ran out of steam and agreed to send me the cancellation terms, probably while crying into his vintage camera collection or whatever it is that hipster photographers do when they're sad. The last call was to our wedding coordinator, Diane, who I'd nicknamed Diane the Dream Destroyer in my head because she had this way of taking Mel's already expensive ideas and somehow making them cost twice as much with essential upgrades and premium packages. Diane answered on the first ring, probably because she had our wedding date tattooed on her brain along with a dozen others. Lucas, I was just about to call you. I found the most amazing uplighting option that would really make the venue pop. Diane, stop. I'm canceling everything. Financial extortion concerns. The silence that followed was profound, the kind of quiet that exists in the vacuum of space or in the moment before a nuclear explosion. I'm sorry, what? You heard me. Cancel it all. Send me whatever paperwork I need to sign. Keep whatever deposits you need to keep. I honestly don't care anymore. I could hear her flipping through papers, her breathing getting faster, probably calculating how much commission she was about to lose. Lucas, can we please discuss this? I'm sure whatever's happening can be resolved. Cold feet are completely normal. Diane, my feet aren't cold. They're perfectly temperature regulated and walking away from this situation at a comfortable pace. Send me the forms. And just like that, with one final click of my phone, I had systematically dismantled an entire wedding in less than 4 hours. It was almost impressive in a catastrophically destructive kind of way. I'm not gonna lie, after I finished making those calls, I felt like I'd just run a marathon. Except instead of getting a medal and some orange slices at the finish line, I got a weird mixture of relief and impending doom sitting in my stomach like bad Chinese food. I made myself that sandwich. Turkey, Swiss cheese, mustard, lettuce, the usual suspects, and sat back down at my kitchen table, staring at my phone like it was a live grenade that hadn't exploded yet, but definitely would. And boy, did it ever explode. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, my phone started buzzing like an angry hornet trapped in a jar, and when I looked at the screen, I saw Melanie's name pop up once, twice, 3 times, then just kept going like she was trying to break some kind of world record for most consecutive calls from someone experiencing a complete psychological breakdown. The missed call notifications started stacking up on my lock screen. 5, 10, 15, and I just watched them accumulate like some kind of twisted social experiment, wondering how high the number would go before she either gave up or drove over here to murder me in person, which honestly seemed like a 50-50 possibility at this point. I didn't answer. Not a single one. I just sat there eating my sandwich, watching my phone light up over and over again like a very annoying Christmas tree, feeling weirdly calm about the whole situation. You know that feeling when you've made a decision that's probably going to nuke your entire life, but you're so convinced it's the right decision that you feel this zen-like peace? Yeah, that. I was a Buddhist monk. If Buddhist monks canceled weddings out of spite and ate turkey sandwiches while watching their phones have seizures. By the time I finished lunch, I had 42 missed calls. 42. That's not a typo. I counted them twice because I couldn't believe it myself. 42 attempts to reach me in the span of maybe 2 hours, which meant Mel was basically hitting redial every 3 minutes like her life depended on it, which I guess in her mind it kind of did, because her entire wedding had just evaporated faster than my patience for this whole situation. Then came the texts, and oh man, the texts were something special. They started out confused. Lucas, the venue just called me? What's going on? With multiple question marks, which is always a great sign that someone's holding onto their sanity by a thread. Then they escalated to panicked. Call me back right now. This isn't funny. Except it kind of was funny, in a dark comedy sort of way. Like watching a horror movie where you know the killer is behind the door, but the character keeps walking toward it anyway. Then we moved into full-blown hysteria territory. What did you do? In all caps. Because apparently we were yelling via text message now, which is the communication style of choice for people whose lives are imploding in real time. The venue called. They said you canceled everything. Well, yeah, Mel, that's generally what happens when you call venues and cancel things. It's not exactly a mystery. What the hell is financial extortion? And there it was, the question I'd been waiting for. The moment she had to confront the actual reason instead of just freaking out about the consequences. I ignored every single message, scrolling through them with the detached interest of someone reading a moderately entertaining novel about someone else's drama. Each text got progressively more desperate, more frantic, more convinced that this was somehow a misunderstanding or a mistake or maybe a prank that had gone way too far. Lucas, please, we need to talk about this like adults. Which was rich, considering the adult thing to do probably would have been to not let your best friend text your fiancé demanding he buy you a luxury car to prove his love. But hey, what do I know about adult behavior? I'm just the guy who actually canceled a wedding instead of pretending everything was fine, while secretly resenting my partner for treating me like a human ATM with commitment issues. My phone kept buzzing, kept lighting up, kept demanding my attention like a needy toddler who just discovered that pulling the cat's tail gets a reaction. But I was committed to my strategy now. Radio silence, the ultimate power move, the thing that drives people absolutely insane because there's no argument to have, no explanation to demand, just the vast, echoing void of someone refusing to engage. Around 6 p.m., after the text had slowed down to a steady drip of desperation instead of a full-on flood, I got the message that confirmed everything I'd suspected. If this is about Tanya, I can explain. Bingo. There it was. The admission I didn't even have to ask for, just sitting there on my screen like a confession that couldn't wait to be heard. She knew. Of course she knew. Tanya didn't just randomly decide to text me about buying Mel a Mercedes out of the goodness of her heart. This was coordinated, planned, probably discussed over multiple brunches with overpriced mimosas while they laughed about how easily I could be manipulated into proving my worth through expensive purchases. The I can explain part was especially hilarious because what possible explanation could there be? Oh, sorry, Lucas. I forgot to mention that my best friend was going to financially extort you on my behalf. My bad, silly me. Yeah, that definitely makes everything better. I stared at that text for a solid 5 minutes, watching the read receipt tell Mel that I'd seen it, imagining her on the other end watching those 3 dots appear and disappear as I typed and deleted various responses, probably losing her mind wondering what I was going to say. But I didn't say anything. I just left her on read, which is the digital equivalent of walking away from someone mid-conversation, and honestly, it felt amazing. Petty? Absolutely. Immature? Probably. Justified? 100%. She could sit there and stew in her own anxiety, wondering what I was thinking, what I was planning, whether I was going to forgive her or dump her or show up at her apartment with a mariachi band and a PowerPoint presentation about why she was wrong. The not knowing was the punishment, way more effective than any angry speech I could have given or any argument we could have had where she'd just cry and make excuses and somehow turn herself into the victim of the situation she literally created. My phone finally stopped buzzing around 7:30, after one final text that just said, please, with no context, no follow-up. Just that one word hanging there like a white flag in a war she didn't even realize she'd started. I made myself dinner. Pasta, Jared sauce. Nothing fancy because I'm a single dude who can barely cook and I'd just canceled my wedding so frozen meatballs seemed appropriate for the occasion. And tried to watch some TV, but honestly, I couldn't focus on anything because my brain was running through every possible scenario of what was going to happen next. Would Mel show up at my apartment? Would she send someone else to plead her case? Would she try to fix this, or would she just write me off as crazy and move on? Part of me felt bad. I'm not gonna lie. 4 years is a long time to be with someone, to build a life with someone, to plan a future with someone. And throwing all of that away over a text message about a car seemed extreme when I thought about it rationally. But then I remembered that it wasn't really about the car, was it? The car was just the symptom of a bigger disease, the final piece of evidence in a case I'd been unconsciously building for months. All those little comments, all those comparisons to other couples, all those hints that I wasn't quite enough unless I could provide more, do more, be more, they all added up to this moment, to Tanya's text message that basically said, your love isn't valid unless you can afford to prove it with German engineering. And once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it. It's like one of those optical illusions where once someone points out the hidden image, you can't figure out how you ever missed it in the first place. So no, I didn't feel that bad. Mostly I felt tired and weirdly free, like I'd been carrying around this heavy backpack full of expectations and obligations, and now I'd just dropped it on the side of the road and walked away. My apartment felt different that night. Quieter, but not in a lonely way. More like peaceful, like the silence after a storm passes and you can finally hear yourself think again. I looked around at all the wedding planning crap still scattered on my table. The spreadsheets, the vendor contracts, the color swatches that all looked identical, and just swept it all into a trash bag, watching 4 years of relationship milestones and 1 year of engagement anxiety disappear into black plastic. Tomorrow I'd probably have to deal with more calls, more texts, more people demanding explanations and trying to fix what I'd deliberately broken. But tonight I was just going to sit here with my mediocre pasta and my paid-off Camry and my intact sense of self-worth, and honestly that felt like more than enough. The next morning, I woke up to 17 new text messages, 6 voicemails, and the distinct feeling that my life had become one of those reality TV shows where everything is on fire and someone's always crying in a confessional booth. But the real surprise came around 9 a.m. when my phone rang with a number I recognized immediately. Linda, Mel's mom. The woman who had spent the last year telling me I was such a catch and the best thing that ever happened to her daughter, and who apparently now needed to have a chat about why I'd just torpedoed said daughter's entire wedding. I considered not answering, continuing my very successful strategy of pretending the entire world didn't exist, but Linda had always been decent to me, and honestly, she was probably the only person in Mel's family who might actually listen to reason instead of just screaming about deposits and ruined dreams. So I answered, bracing myself for either a guilt trip that would make a Catholic grandmother proud, or possibly just more yelling, because that seemed to be the theme of my week. Lucas, what is going on? Melanie is hysterical. Linda's voice came through the phone, not angry exactly, but definitely stressed in that way moms get when their kids are losing their minds, and they're trying to figure out who to blame. She's been crying for hours. She won't eat. She won't talk to anyone except to say you canceled everything, and she doesn't understand why. Yeah, I bet she doesn't understand why. Or at least that's the story she's selling, conveniently leaving out the part where her best friend tried to shake me down for a luxury vehicle like some kind of upscale mob operation. Oh, just the usual, I said, keeping my voice calm and casual like we were discussing the weather instead of the complete demolition of my engagement. Apparently, I'm not marriage material unless there's a Mercedes in the driveway. Didn't realize I needed to pass a car ownership test to qualify for eternal commitment. But you learn something new every day. The silence on the other end was long enough that I actually checked my phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped, and when Linda finally spoke again, her voice had dropped about 20 degrees in temperature. That little witch Tanya, she muttered, and I could practically hear her grinding her teeth through the phone, which was actually kind of satisfying because at least someone in Mel's family had working brain cells and could see this situation for what it actually was. I told Melanie months ago that girl was poison, but does she listen to me? No, because apparently I don't understand friendship or some nonsense. Linda sighed, and I heard what sounded like a cabinet door slamming in the background, probably because she was stress cleaning or stress organizing or doing whatever it is that moms do when their daughters make spectacularly bad life choices. Well, your daughter didn't exactly shut her up either, I pointed out, because yeah, Tanya was the messenger, but Mel was the one who apparently agreed that my net worth needed to be higher before she could confidently walk down the aisle. In fact, based on her text message, she knew exactly what Tanya was doing and was totally fine with it until I actually called her bluff. Linda made this noise that was half sigh, half groan, the universal sound of parents everywhere realizing their children are idiots and there's nothing they can do about it. I don't even know what to say, Lucas. I'm so disappointed in her. In both of them, really, but especially Melanie for going along with this ridiculous scheme. She paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath like she was gathering strength for whatever came next. Can you two just talk this out? I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but 4 years is a long time to throw away over financial extortion. I interrupted, because I was getting real tired of people minimizing what had actually happened here, like this was just a little misunderstanding or a communication breakdown instead of a fundamental betrayal of trust wrapped in designer car payments. Linda, with all due respect, This isn't about being stubborn or proud or whatever. This is about the fact that your daughter literally let her friend text me demanding I buy her a $40,000 car to prove I was worthy of marrying her. That's not a relationship, that's a transaction, and I don't do business with people who think love comes with a price tag. Linda was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, she sounded tired, like she'd aged 10 years in the span of this conversation, which honestly I felt bad about, because she'd always treated me well and didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this disaster. "You're right," she said finally, and I almost dropped my phone because I wasn't expecting actual agreement. "You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry this happened to you. I raised her better than this, or at least I thought I did." She sighed again, heavier this time. "But Lucas, she's still my daughter, and I have to ask, is there any possibility of working through this? Any chance you two could sit down and—" "Sure," I said, cutting her off before she could finish her peacemaking pitch. "As soon as the refund fairy drops $15,000 into her account for all the deposits she's about to lose, we can absolutely sit down and have a chat. Until then, I'm going to go ahead and continue living my best life without the weight of her expectations crushing my soul." It came out harsher than I meant it to, and I immediately felt like kind of an asshole because Linda really was trying to help, but I was also exhausted from explaining myself to people who should have understood without needing a PowerPoint presentation about why financial extortion is bad, actually. "I understand," Linda said quietly, and she actually did sound like she understood, not in that fake sympathetic way people do when they're just waiting for their turn to talk, but genuinely. "For what it's worth, Lucas, I think you're handling this better than most people would. Frank and I always liked you. Thought you were good for Melanie. Kept her grounded." She laughed, but it was bitter. Guess she didn't want to be grounded anymore. Wanted to fly, or whatever ridiculous metaphor applies here. We talked for a few more minutes, Linda apologizing for things that weren't her fault while I assured her that I didn't blame her or Frank for their daughter's terrible judgment. And by the time we hung up, I actually felt a little better, like at least one person in this whole mess was capable of seeing reality clearly instead of through the Instagram-filtered lens of wedding fantasies and luxury car dreams. I should have known that the phone calls and text messages were just the opening act, the appetizer before the main course of absolute chaos that was about to be served on a platter directly to my living room. I got home from work that evening around 6:30, had a relatively normal day at the office if you don't count the fact that I checked my phone every 5 minutes expecting another crisis, and my coworker Derek kept asking if I was okay, because apparently I looked like someone who'd witnessed a crime. And the moment I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot, I saw them. Mel's car, obviously, that white Honda Accord she'd been complaining about for the past year because it wasn't aspirational enough, whatever the hell that means. But also Tanya's obnoxious silver Lexus that she definitely couldn't afford based on her job as a social media manager for a local boutique, which meant she was probably drowning in car payments while lecturing other people about financial priorities. And then there was another car I recognized as belonging to Amber, Mel's sister. And holy crap, was that Linda's SUV too? This wasn't just a confrontation. This was a full-scale intervention, an ambush, a carefully coordinated attack that probably required a group chat and a battle plan. For a second, I seriously considered just driving away, maybe going to Tom's place or literally anywhere else on planet Earth. But then I remembered that this was my apartment, I paid rent here, and I'd be damned if I was going to let a committee of people who were wrong about everything chase me out of my own home. So I parked my trusty Camry, which had never once demanded I prove my love through expensive purchases, by the way, just needed oil changes and gas like a reasonable vehicle, and walked up to my front door with the confidence of a man who had absolutely nothing to lose because he'd already lost it all on purpose. I unlocked the door and walked into what can only be described as the world's most uncomfortable intervention setup, with Mel sitting on my couch looking like she'd been crying for 3 days straight, her eyes all red and puffy, mascara smudged in that way that's supposed to make you feel guilty, but honestly, just made me think she should invest in waterproof makeup. Tanya was perched on the arm of the couch like some kind of designer gargoyle, wearing sunglasses indoors because of course she was, probably thinking it made her look mysterious and cool instead of like someone trying to hide a hangover at a funeral. Amber was standing by the window with her arms crossed, already looking judgmental before I'd even said a word, and Linda was sitting in my recliner, my favorite chair, the audacity, with her hands folded in her lap, like she was about to moderate a United Nations peace summit instead of a breakup that her daughter had caused through her own spectacular lack of judgment. The energy in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. That specific tension that exists right before someone says something they can't take back or throws something expensive at someone's head, and I just stood there in my own doorway, holding my work bag, looking at this collection of people who'd invaded my space to tell me I was wrong for having self-respect. Lucas, Mel started, and her voice cracked immediately, which was probably strategic because she knew I had a hard time seeing her cry, except this time I'd built up an immunity through sheer spite and righteous anger. How could you humiliate me like this? Do you have any idea what people are saying? What everyone thinks? And there it was, the real issue. Not that she'd tried to extort me, or that she'd been planning this with Tanya, or that she'd fundamentally misunderstood what a relationship should be, but that people were talking about her, that her reputation had taken a hit, that the gossip mill was grinding her up and spitting her out. By refusing to be financially extorted, I said, dropping my bag on the floor and crossing my arms, mirroring Amber's defensive posture, because if we were doing body language warfare, I could play that game too. Yeah, my bad. Should have just emptied my savings account and bought you a Mercedes like a good little ATM. How silly of me to think love should be about, actual love instead of German automotive engineering. Tanya jumped in immediately, because of course she did, probably couldn't stand not being the center of attention for more than 30 seconds. You're twisting things. I was just trying to help her. Melanie deserves someone who can provide for her, who can give her the life she's always dreamed about. And if you really loved her, you'd want that too. Her voice was all high-pitched and defensive, like a chihuahua that's been backed into a corner and is trying to sound tough despite weighing 7 pounds. Yeah, Tanya, helping her straight into a transactional relationship where my value as a human being is measured by my ability to finance luxury vehicles. Thank you so much for your service. Truly, you're doing God's work here. I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice, didn't even try, because this whole situation was so absurd that maybe next time she'll consider whether her fiancé is a partner or a piggy bank before she starts planning a wedding that's apparently contingent on his ability to buy her things she wants but doesn't need. Mel was full-on sobbing now, that ugly crying where your whole face scrunches up and you can barely breathe, and part of me, a very small, rapidly shrinking part, felt bad about making her cry in front of her family. But the much larger part, the part that had been building up resentment for months while she made comments about other people's engagement rings and their vacation photos and their brand new cars, that part felt nothing but vindication. I never said buy me a car. Mel managed to gasp out between sobs, and I actually laughed, which probably made me look like a villain in everyone else's eyes, but I genuinely couldn't help it because the audacity of that statement was just too much. Right, you're absolutely correct. You never explicitly said the words, Lucas, buy me a car. I said, using my most condescending voice, the one I reserve for explaining obvious things to people who are being deliberately obtuse. You just let your best friend text me on your behalf demanding exactly that, and then when I canceled the wedding, you texted me saying, if this is about Tanya, I can explain, which means you knew, Mel. You knew what she was doing, you probably encouraged it. And you only have a problem with it now because I actually called your bluff instead of falling in line like you expected. Tanya stood up, her sunglasses sliding down her nose in what would have been a dramatic moment if it wasn't so completely ridiculous. This is insane. You're being completely unreasonable. Melanie loves you. She's always loved you. And you're throwing away 4 years over pride. Pride. That's what they thought this was about. Not self-respect, not basic human dignity. Not the fundamental principle that relationships shouldn't come with a price tag, but pride, like I was just being stubborn for the sake of being stubborn. No, Tanya, I'm walking away from something transactional disguised as love, I said, and I felt weirdly calm now, like all the anger had burned itself out and left behind this clear-headed certainty that I was doing exactly the right thing. I'm refusing to participate in a relationship where my worth is determined by what I can buy, where every gift has to be bigger than the last one, where I'm constantly being compared to other people's boyfriends and husbands and coming up short because I drive a Camry instead of a BMW. That's not love, that's a business arrangement, and I don't sign contracts without reading the fine print. Tanya actually stomped her foot. I'm not making this up. She literally stomped her foot like a toddler who'd been told no for the first time in her entitled life. And I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing, because this grown woman was having a full meltdown in my living room over the fact that her manipulation tactics hadn't worked. "You'll die alone with your stupid Camry," she shrieked. And okay, now I did laugh, because that was possibly the most ridiculous threat I'd ever heard in my entire life. "Good," I said, smiling for the first time since this whole circus had started. At least the Camrys paid off. 2 days after the intervention disaster, which ended with Tanya storming out while yelling something about karma, Amber following her while muttering that I was toxic, Mel crying into Linda's shoulder, and Linda giving me this apologetic look that said, "I tried," before shepherding everyone out of my apartment like a mom collecting drunk teenagers from a party. I thought maybe the worst was over. I thought maybe everyone would take some time to cool down, reflect on their life choices, perhaps realize that trying to financially manipulate someone into buying a luxury car is actually insane behavior that shouldn't be rewarded. But no, because the universe apparently decided I hadn't suffered enough entertainment yet, and the next act in this circus came via email from Bradley, Mel's cousin who I'd met exactly twice at family gatherings, and who had introduced himself both times as Bradley Mitchell, attorney at law, like he was a character in a legal drama, instead of just a guy who worked at a small firm doing real estate closings and traffic tickets. The email arrived at 11 a.m. on a Thursday while I was in a meeting about database optimization, and my phone buzzed with the preview notification that just said "Formal Demand Letter" in the subject line, which is never a good sign unless you're expecting a ransom note or communication from someone who learned everything they know about law from watching too much court TV. I waited until lunch to actually open it, sitting in my car in the parking lot with a sandwich from the deli across the street. And the moment I started reading, I knew this was going to be comedy gold. "Dear Mr. Rivers," it began, already off to a strong start with the formal address like we were strangers instead of people who'd awkwardly made small talk about football at Thanksgiving dinner. "I am writing on behalf of my client, Ms. Melanie Patterson, regarding the emotional distress and reputational damage you have caused through your reckless and malicious cancellation of the wedding scheduled for October 21st. Emotional distress, reputational damage, reckless and malicious. This dude was really throwing around legal-sounding words like confetti at a parade, probably hoping I'd be intimidated into compliance, not realizing that I'd been friends with an actual competent lawyer since college and could smell bullshit legal threats from a mile away. The letter went on for 2 full pages. He really committed to this performance, detailing how my sudden and unexplained cancellation had caused Mel severe psychological harm, public humiliation, and significant financial losses totaling approximately $15,700. He conveniently left out the part about why I canceled, the whole financial extortion thing, probably because including that would have made his client look less like a victim and more like someone who'd played stupid games and won stupid prizes. The best part, though, the absolute chef's kiss moment of this ridiculous document, was the demand at the end. "Ms. Patterson is prepared to resolve this matter outside of court if you agree to compensate her for the full amount of her losses, plus an additional sum of $15,000 for pain and suffering, totaling $30,700, to be paid within 14 business days of receipt of this letter." I actually choked on my sandwich. This man, this glorified real estate attorney who probably spent most of his day explaining to confused homebuyers what escrow means, was demanding I pay his cousin $30,000 because I refused to marry someone who tried to shake me down for a Mercedes. The audacity was almost impressive, like watching someone confidently walk into the wrong house and then demand the actual residents leave. I finished my lunch, drove back to the office, and immediately forwarded the email to Tom, my buddy from college who'd gone to a good law school and now worked at a firm that actually handled real cases instead of whatever amateur hour nonsense Bradley was attempting. Tom called me back within 20 minutes, and I could hear him laughing before I even said hello. "Dude, what the hell is this? Did this guy get his law degree from a cereal box?" he wheezed, clearly having trouble breathing through his amusement. "That's what I'm dealing with," I said, leaning back in my desk chair and watching my coworkers pretend they weren't trying to eavesdrop on my conversation. "Mel's cousin thinks he's going to intimidate me into paying her $30,000 for the crime of not marrying her. Tom laughed so hard I heard him snort coffee, followed by some coughing and what sounded like him apologizing to someone in his office for spraying coffee on their desk. Lucas, this is the funniest thing I've read all year, and I once reviewed a contract where someone tried to pay for legal services with cryptocurrency and baseball cards. This isn't even a real demand letter. This is like someone's first draft of what they think a demand letter should look like based on watching Law and Order. He cleared his throat, getting his professional composure back. Want me to respond? Because I would love to respond to this. I mean, I probably shouldn't enjoy my job this much, but come on, this is gold. I told him to go ahead, spare no expense on the legal jargon, really make Bradley regret his decision to cosplay as a competent attorney, and Tom promised he'd have something drafted by end of day that would professionally destroy this man's will to practice law. True to his word, Tom sent me the response letter that evening, and it was a thing of beauty, a masterpiece of legal writing that managed to be both completely professional and absolutely savage. It opened with a polite acknowledgement of Bradley's letter, then immediately pivoted to pointing out approximately 17 different ways his demand was legally baseless, citing actual case law and statutes about what constitutes actionable emotional distress, explaining in excruciating detail why you can't sue someone for refusing to marry you, and then, and this was my favorite part, included a section titled, Regarding the Actual Facts of This Matter, where Tom attached screenshots of Tanya's text messages about the Mercedes, noted that attempting to coerce someone into marriage through financial demands could itself be considered a form of extortion, and suggested that any further contact should be carefully considered in light of the potential legal liability your client may face for harassment and attempted extortion. The letter concluded with a statement that any additional communication should be directed to Tom's office, and that continued harassment will result in immediate legal action, which is lawyer speak for, try me and find out what happens. Tom signed it with his full credentials, his firm's letterhead making it clear that this wasn't some cousin doing a favor, but an actual attorney who knew exactly what he was doing and had the resources to back it up. I forwarded the response to Bradley's email address and then did something I'm not entirely proud of, but don't regret even a little bit. I sat on my couch with a beer and waited to see how long it would take for him to realize he'd just been professionally demolished. The answer was 43 minutes. 43 minutes before my phone buzzed with an email from Bradley that just said, "Matter resolved, no further action will be taken," with none of the formal language or legal posturing from his original letter. Just a quick retreat from someone who'd just learned that pretending to be a tough lawyer on behalf of your cousin is a lot less fun when you run into someone who actually knows what they're doing. I didn't respond, just deleted the email and finished my beer, feeling more satisfied than I had in days. I thought after Bradley's spectacular legal faceplant, things might finally start to settle down, that maybe everyone would accept that this wedding was dead and buried, and we could all move on with our lives like adults who'd learned valuable lessons about not trying to extort their significant others. But apparently the universe wasn't done with me yet, because 3 days later I got a call from Frank, Mel's dad, and my stomach immediately dropped because Frank was the one person in this entire family that I actually respected and genuinely liked. Frank was this quiet, no-nonsense guy who worked in construction management, drove a 15-year-old Ford F-150 that he maintained himself, and had never once in the 4 years I'd known him made me feel like I needed to be anything other than exactly who I was. He didn't care that I wasn't rich, didn't comment on my car or my apartment or my career trajectory, just treated me like a person instead of a potential investment opportunity. So when I saw his name pop up on my phone, I felt this weird combination of dread and hope, like maybe he was calling to yell at me, but also maybe he was the one person who might actually understand what had happened without me needing to explain it 17 different ways. "Lucas," he said when I answered, his voice gravelly in that way it gets from years of shouting over construction equipment and probably too many cigars on the weekends. "I'm not here to convince you to get back together with Melanie or tell you you're making a mistake or any of that nonsense. I just want to know what really happened. Linda told me her version, Mel told me hers, but I want to hear it from you." So I told him everything. The text from Tanya about the Mercedes, the demand that I prove my love through expensive purchases, the way Mel's text confirmed she knew what was happening, all of it. I didn't editorialize or add dramatic flair, just laid out the facts like I was giving a deposition, and Frank listened without interrupting once, which is more than I could say for literally anyone else in his family. When I finished, there was this long silence on the other end, and I could hear him breathing, probably processing the information, maybe wondering how his daughter had turned into someone who thought love could be measured in German luxury vehicles and leather seat upgrades. "Good Lord," he finally said, and he sounded tired, like someone who'd just discovered their basement was flooded and they didn't have insurance. "She really asked for a Mercedes?" Through Tanya, the disbelief in his voice was almost comforting, confirmation that I wasn't crazy for thinking this was insane behavior. "Yep," I said, popping the P sound because honestly what else was there to say? Deluxe Model 2, apparently. Because if you're going to financially extort someone, might as well go big or go home, right? Leather seats equal emotional security, or so I'm told. Frank made this sound that was half laugh, half groan, the noise of a man who'd spent years building a life and raising a daughter only to discover she'd somehow internalized the worst values of Instagram culture and materialism despite his best efforts. "That's it," he said, and I could hear the decision in his voice, that firm tone that meant he'd made up his mind about something and nothing was going to change it. "I'm pulling my contribution. I told Linda I'd pay for half the wedding. Gave Melanie a check for $12,000 last month for the deposits and the dress and whatever else she needed. But that money was for a marriage, Lucas, not a transaction. Not this, whatever this turned into." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me felt vindicated, like finally someone in Mel's family was holding her accountable for her choices instead of just blaming me for refusing to play along. But another part of me felt guilty, because Frank's money was now gone, vaporized by his daughter's poor judgment and my decision to burn everything down rather than compromise my self-respect. "Frank, I'm sorry it came to this," I said, because even though I wasn't sorry about canceling the wedding, I was sorry that he was caught in the fallout. "You've always been good to me, treated me like family, and I hate that your money got wasted on this disaster." Frank sighed, and I heard what sounded like him settling into his favorite chair, that old recliner in his garage where he'd go to escape family drama and drink beer while pretending to organize tools. "Don't apologize for having standards, son. That money's gone. Yeah, but better to lose 12 grand now than watch you be miserable for the next 40 years because you married someone who sees you as a wallet with legs." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more reflective. "You know what my dad told me when I got married? He said, 'Love builds wealth, flash burns it.' Took me years to understand what he meant, but now I get it. Love builds wealth, flash burns it." That line hit me like a truck carrying profound wisdom and uncomfortable truths, because that's exactly what had happened here, wasn't it? Mel had been so focused on the flash, the wedding, the ring, the car she didn't have, the life she thought she deserved, that she'd completely missed the actual wealth we could have built together. Not money wealth, although that too, but the kind of wealth that comes from partnership and trust and actually giving a damn about each other as people instead of as accessories to some Instagram perfect life. "That's a hell of a line," I said, and Frank chuckled. My dad was a smart man, smarter than me, definitely smarter than my daughter apparently. We talked for a few more minutes, Frank telling me I was welcome at their house anytime, that he didn't blame me for any of this, that he hoped I'd find someone who appreciated me for who I was instead of what I could buy. By the time we hung up, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying around this weight of guilt about hurting Mel's family, and Frank had just lifted it off my shoulders with his understanding and his dad's wisdom about love and wealth. I sat there in my apartment, staring at my phone, thinking about flash versus substance, about relationships built on expectations versus ones built on actual connection, and I realized that losing Mel wasn't the tragedy everyone was making it out to be. The real tragedy would have been marrying her, spending decades trying to meet standards that would always move just out of reach, watching my bank account drain while my soul slowly died from the effort of being someone I wasn't. Frank got it. His dad had gotten it. And now, finally, I was starting to get it too. I made it exactly 5 more days before the drama found a new, more creative way to ruin my life. Because apparently canceling a wedding, surviving a family intervention, and getting threatened with a bogus lawsuit wasn't enough chaos for 1 month. I was sitting at my desk on a Tuesday afternoon, actually having a decent day for once, working on some code that was cooperating for a change and not throwing random errors like it usually did, when I got a call from HR. Now, getting called to HR is never good, even if you haven't done anything wrong, because there's something about that department that makes everyone feel guilty just for existing. Like you're being called to the principal's office, except the principal can fire you and ruin your health insurance. I walked down to the third floor, trying to remember if I'd done anything that could possibly be construed as a fireable offense, coming up blank because I'm pretty boring as employees go. I show up on time, do my work, don't steal office supplies or harass people, or do any of the normal things that get you sent to HR for a come-to-Jesus conversation. Margaret from HR was waiting for me in one of those small conference rooms that somehow always smell like stale coffee and broken dreams, and she had her laptop open with this expression on her face that I couldn't quite read, somewhere between concerned and confused, like she'd been asked to investigate a crime, but wasn't entirely sure a crime had actually occurred. "Lucas, thanks for coming down," she said, gesturing for me to sit in the chair across from her, which I did while trying to keep my heart rate under control, because my body was convinced I was about to be fired even though my brain knew I hadn't done anything wrong. "We received some concerning messages on our company Facebook page this morning, and I need to ask you about them." She turned her laptop around so I could see the screen, and there it was, 3 separate comments on our company's most recent post about some charity event we'd sponsored, all from an account with a blonde woman's profile picture that I recognized immediately even though the name was different. Melissa Patterson instead of Melanie. Real subtle there, Mel. The comments were works of fiction, really, creative writing that would have been impressive if they weren't actively trying to destroy my reputation and possibly get me fired. "Lucas Rivers, who works in your IT department, is financially abusive and manipulative. He canceled his wedding without telling his fiancée, leaving her thousands of dollars in debt, and is now harassing her family. Your company should know what kind of person they employ." Another one said, "Be careful doing business with this company. They employ Lucas Rivers, who has been emotionally abusing his ex-fiancée and threatening her with legal action for trying to get back the money he stole from her." And the third, my personal favorite for sheer audacity, claimed Lucas Rivers is a narcissist who gets off on controlling women through financial manipulation. He convinced his fiancée to plan an expensive wedding, then canceled it to punish her. Is this the kind of person representing your company? I sat there staring at these comments, my brain trying to process the fact that Mel had actually done this, had actually tried to get me fired by posting lies on my company's public Facebook page, and I felt this weird mixture of rage and almost respect for the sheer balls it took to escalate things to this level. "Let me guess," I said, looking up at Margaret, who was watching me carefully. "Blonde, dramatic, recently single?" Margaret's lips twitched like she was trying not to smile, which was actually a good sign because it meant she wasn't taking this completely seriously. "I had a feeling there might be more to this story," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Want to tell me what actually happened?" So I did, again, pulling up the screenshots I'd apparently been smart enough to keep of Tanya's texts, showing her the whole timeline of events, the Mercedes demand, the cancellations, the intervention, Bradley's fake legal threat, all of it. Margaret read through everything, her eyebrows climbing higher and higher on her forehead until they basically disappeared into her hairline. And when she finally looked up at me, she looked like someone who'd just finished watching a really bizarre reality show and wasn't sure if it was real or scripted. "She tried to extort you for a car?" Margaret said slowly, like she was testing the words to make sure she'd understood correctly. "Basically, yeah," I confirmed, because at this point I'd told this story so many times I could probably recite it in my sleep. Her best friend texted me saying Mel wouldn't marry me unless I proved myself by buying her a Mercedes. I canceled the wedding instead. Pretty straightforward cause and effect, really. Margaret shook her head, clicking through the screenshots again like she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. "Lucas, I've dealt with some messy personal situations affecting work before, but this is a new one." She closed her laptop and looked at me directly. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to document all of this, including these screenshots, and we're going to report those Facebook comments as harassment and get them taken down. The company's social media manager already flagged them as suspicious, which is why I called you in, but now that I know the context, we can handle this appropriately." She paused, then added with the tiniest hint of a smile. "Also, between you and me, if someone tried to shake me down for a luxury car before marriage, I'd probably react worse than you did. You actually handled this pretty professionally, all things considered. Every cancellation had proper documentation. You didn't badmouth the company or use company resources for personal drama. You just extracted yourself from a bad situation. I felt this wave of relief wash over me, because getting validation from HR, actual HR, not just friends or family taking sides, meant that I wasn't crazy, that my reaction had been proportionate and reasonable, that refusing to be financially manipulated was actually the sane choice here. Please note for the record, I said, trying to keep things light even though I was still processing the fact that Mel had actually tried to get me fired. I did it all very professionally. Color-coded spreadsheets and everything. Margaret actually laughed at that, making a note in whatever file she was keeping about this situation. I can see that. Very organized chaos. She stood up, signaling the meeting was over, and walked me to the door. Lucas, keep your head down for a while. Maybe avoid any new engagements until this blows over, she said. And I could tell she was half joking, but also half serious. No problem there, Margaret, I assured her, already mentally adding get HR involved in relationship drama to my list of things I never wanted to experience again. I'm thinking of just getting a dog instead. Much less complicated, way more loyal, and they never demand luxury vehicles. 3 weeks had passed since the HR incident, and I'd finally started to feel like maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was winding down and I could go back to living my boring, drama-free life, where the most exciting thing that happened was discovering a new taco truck near my apartment. The Facebook comments had been removed. Mel had gone quiet after Margaret sent her a cease and desist letter that was probably way scarier than anything Bradley could have drafted, and I'd actually gone a full 72 hours without anyone from her family calling or texting to either yell at me or apologize for everyone else yelling at me. I should have known better than to think it was over, because the universe apparently had one more act in this circus. One final performance that would somehow manage to be even more ridiculous than everything that had come before. I was getting home from the gym on a Saturday afternoon, still in my workout clothes and feeling pretty good about myself, because I'd actually stuck to my new routine for 2 whole weeks, when I saw someone sitting on the stairs outside my apartment building. Tanya. Of course it was Tanya. Because why would this story end without one more confrontation with the woman who'd started this entire disaster with her Mercedes-demanding text message? She stood up when she saw me, and she looked rough. Not like crying for days rough the way Mel had looked during the intervention, but more like someone who'd been on the receiving end of some serious social consequences and was starting to realize that actions have, actual repercussions. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled like usual. She was wearing jeans and a regular t-shirt instead of her typical trying too hard designer outfit, and most shocking of all, no sunglasses. I could actually see her eyes, which looked tired and kind of desperate, like she was about to beg for something she knew she didn't deserve. Lucas, she said, and her voice didn't have that condescending edge it usually carried, that tone that implied she was doing you a favor by even acknowledging your existence. We need to talk. I really didn't want to talk to Tanya. Wanted to just walk past her into my building and pretend I hadn't seen her. But curiosity got the better of me because I genuinely couldn't imagine what she could possibly have left to say at this point. Make it quick, Tanya, I said, not moving from where I was standing on the sidewalk, making it clear that she wasn't invited inside and this conversation was going to happen right here in public where hopefully she wouldn't cause too much of a scene. You're throwing away something beautiful over pride, she said, and apparently we were starting with the same tired arguments that hadn't worked 3 weeks ago and definitely weren't going to work now. Melanie loves you. She's always loved you. You two were perfect together before you decided to. Before I decided to what? I interrupted, because I was not about to let her rewrite history and make me the villain in a story where she'd literally tried to shake me down for a car. Before I decided I didn't want to be in a transactional relationship where my value as a human being was measured by my ability to buy expensive things. Before I realized that being asked to prove my love through financing a Mercedes was actually insane behavior that I shouldn't tolerate. Which part exactly should I have handled differently, Tanya? She looked frustrated, like she couldn't understand why her manipulation tactics weren't working, why I wasn't falling for the same guilt trips and emotional appeals that probably worked on other people in her life. You're being deliberately obtuse, she snapped. And there was the real Tanya. the one who couldn't maintain the desperate friend act for more than 2 minutes. This isn't about the car. It's about showing Melanie that you're committed, that you're willing to invest in your future together. No, Tanya, I'm walking away from something transactional disguised as love, I said, echoing what I'd told her during the intervention because apparently she needed to hear it again. I'm refusing to participate in a relationship where my worth is determined by what I can buy, where every gift has to be bigger than the last one, where I'm constantly being evaluated against some imaginary standard of success that has nothing to do with actual happiness or partnership. That's not love. That's a business arrangement, and I don't sign contracts that are designed to screw me over. Tanya's face was turning red now, that specific shade that happens when someone's about to completely lose their composure. And I took a step back because I genuinely wasn't sure if she was going to start crying or start throwing punches. She did neither. Instead, she stomped her foot, again, like she'd learned all her confrontation techniques from watching toddlers at the grocery store, and yelled, "You'll die alone with your stupid Camry," which was, hands down, still the most ridiculous threat anyone had ever directed at me, and I'd been threatened with a fake lawsuit and public defamation, so that was saying something. "Good," I said, and I smiled at her, a real genuine smile because the absurdity of this moment had finally broken through my anger and landed squarely in comedy territory. At least the Camrys paid off. I turned and walked into my building, leaving Tanya standing there on the sidewalk, probably trying to figure out why her dramatic exit line hadn't landed the way she'd planned. I didn't look back, just kept walking up the stairs to my apartment, and by the time I got inside and locked the door behind me, I was actually laughing. The whole thing was so stupid, so unnecessarily dramatic, so perfectly encapsulated by Tanya's threat about dying alone with my reliable, fuel-efficient vehicle that I couldn't help but see the humor in it. I'd dodged a bullet, or more accurately, I'd seen the bullet coming and actively jumped out of the way. And yeah, it had been messy and expensive and exhausting, but I was free. Free from the expectations, free from the constant comparisons, free from the nagging feeling that I would never be enough no matter what I did or bought or achieved. 2 months after everything imploded, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, the local one with the mismatched furniture and the barista who knew my order without asking. Not some overpriced chain where they spell your name wrong on purpose for Instagram engagement. When I finally took stock of where my life had ended up after the great wedding cancellation of whatever year this was, because honestly time had become kind of blurry during the chaos. The final tally of Mel's losses had come in at $15,700 in non-refundable deposits, which Frank had absolutely refused to bail her out of despite Linda's attempts to convince him otherwise. I'd heard through the grapevine, specifically through Linda, who still texted me occasionally to apologize for her daughter's behavior and ask how I was doing, that Mel had to pick up extra shifts at her job and move into a cheaper apartment because the financial hit was too much to absorb on her marketing coordinator salary. Part of me felt bad about that, the part that had loved her for 4 years and didn't want to see her struggling. But the much larger part recognized that consequences were important, and maybe this would teach her something about treating people like ATMs with feelings. Tanya had become a social pariah, which was honestly the most satisfying outcome of this entire disaster. Once the screenshots of her texts started circulating, and yeah, I might have accidentally let them slip to a few mutual friends who asked what happened. Their entire friend group had collectively dropped her like a hot potato made of toxicity and bad judgment. Turns out that when people realize you're the type of person who tries to manipulate your best friend's fiancé into buying luxury cars through emotional blackmail, they start questioning whether they want you in their lives at all. Who knew? Last I heard, she deleted all her social media accounts after getting absolutely roasted in the comments of every post, which was probably for the best because the internet has a long memory and an even longer capacity for holding grudges against people who do shady stuff. Bradley, the cousin who'd cosplayed as a competent lawyer for exactly one embarrassing email, had apparently gotten a stern talking to from his actual law firm after Tom sent them a courtesy copy of his response letter. Nothing official happened, no formal reprimand or anything, but according to Frank, who heard it from his sister, who heard it from Bradley's mom, the partners at his firm had pulled him aside and strongly suggested he not attempt to practice law outside his very narrow lane of real estate closings and maybe consider keeping family drama separate from professional correspondence. Bradley had apparently turned bright red during this conversation and hadn't attended a single family gathering since, which I felt slightly bad about, but also, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. As for me, I was thriving in ways I hadn't even expected. My bank account was healthier than it had been in years because I wasn't constantly trying to keep up with Mel's expectations for gifts and experiences and the general lifestyle inflation that comes with dating someone who measures love in price tags. My stress levels had dropped so dramatically that my doctor actually commented on my blood pressure at my annual checkup, asking what I'd changed in my life, and I told him I canceled a wedding, and he just nodded like that made perfect sense. "Yeah, that'll do it," he'd said, and we'd both laughed because apparently even medical professionals understand that some relationships are more hazardous to your health than fast food and lack of exercise combined. I'd picked up hobbies I'd abandoned during the relationship, started playing guitar again, joined a recreational soccer league, actually read books for pleasure instead of wedding planning guides, and discovered that having free time and disposable income was actually pretty great when you weren't using both to fund someone else's Instagram-worthy lifestyle. My Camry was still running perfectly, by the way, still getting me from point A to point B without requiring me to prove my worth as a human being or take out a second mortgage, and I'd started to genuinely appreciate its reliability in a way I never had before. The absolute cherry on top of this whole saga, though, the moment that made everything feel like it had worked out exactly the way it was supposed to, came exactly 73 days after I canceled the wedding when I got a text from Maya, one of Mel's old friends from college who I'd always gotten along with but hadn't talked to much because she'd moved across the country for work and we just naturally drifted apart. "Hey Lucas," the text said, casual and friendly without any of the drama or manipulation that had characterized every other message I'd gotten in the past 2 months. "I heard what happened with you and Mel. Just wanted to say I admire how you handled that whole situation. It took guts to walk away, and honestly, she needed someone to call her out on her bullshit. Also, completely unrelated, but my sister just moved to your city for a new job and doesn't know anyone. Would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime? No pressure, just thought you two might hit it off." I stared at that message for a solid 5 minutes, reading it over and over to make sure it wasn't some kind of trap or scheme, because at this point I had trust issues that would require years of therapy to fully unpack. But Maya had always been cool, always been genuine, never participated in the materialism Olympics that Mel and her closer friends seemed to be competing in, so I figured what the hell, worst case scenario, I'd make a new friend. Best case scenario, I'd meet someone who understood that relationships should be built on actual compatibility instead of financial statements. We met for coffee at my favorite local place, not some fancy spot where a latte costs more than my car payment, and Maya's sister Rachel showed up wearing jeans and a college hoodie, driving a Honda Civic that looked about as old as my Camry, and the first thing she said when she sat down was, "I hope you don't mind, but Maya told me the whole story about your ex and the Mercedes thing, and I just want you to know that's the most insane thing I've ever heard, and you absolutely made the right call." I actually laughed out loud. This genuine surprised laugh that came from relief and the sheer absurdity of starting a potential friendship or whatever this was with a conversation about my failed engagement and my ex's car demands. "Thanks," I said, and I meant it, because having someone immediately validate that I wasn't crazy for my reaction was still somehow novel and appreciated. "It's been a wild few months, not gonna lie." Rachel smiled, pulled out her phone, and showed me something that made me almost spit out my coffee. It was a spreadsheet, an actual, color-coded, meticulously organized spreadsheet titled Rachel's 5-year financial plan, with tabs for savings goals, investment allocations, debt payoff schedules, and projected net worth by age 30. "I know this probably makes me look like a total nerd," she said, and she actually looked a little embarrassed, which was adorable. "But I'm really serious about financial independence and not being dependent on anyone else for my security. Maya said you were big on fiscal responsibility too, so I figured I'd just put it out there up front before we waste each other's time, if that's weird for you." I just sat there staring at this spreadsheet, at this woman who'd opened a conversation by showing me her financial planning instead of her Instagram feed, who drove a paid-off Civic and wore comfortable clothes and apparently thought budgeting was first-date conversation material. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Genuine, uncomplicated hope that maybe not everyone in the world was obsessed with appearances and luxury purchases and keeping up with whatever the Joneses were doing. That's not weird at all, I said, probably smiling like an idiot but not caring. That's actually really refreshing. Want to see my retirement account breakdown? I've got it on my phone because I check it way too often like a normal person. Rachel's face lit up like I'd just offered her tickets to her favorite concert, and we spent the next 2 hours talking about index funds and compound interest and the difference between traditional and Roth IRAs, which is objectively the nerdiest first date conversation in human history, but also somehow the most comfortable I'd felt talking to someone in longer than I could remember. We talked about other stuff too, her new job in software engineering, my work in IT, our shared love of hiking and cheap Mexican food and movies that were so bad they looped back around to being good. And by the time we left that coffee shop, I had her number saved in my phone and plans to go on an actual date the following weekend. Walking back to my car, my trusty Camry sitting there in the parking lot like the reliable champion it was, I realized something that probably should have been obvious from the beginning, but had taken a canceled wedding and 2 months of chaos to fully understand. The best revenge isn't luxury cars or expensive weddings or proving to your ex that they made a mistake by upgrading your entire life despite them. The best revenge is peace. It's coming home to an apartment that feels comfortable instead of like a showroom. It's checking your bank account and seeing actual savings instead of anxiety. It's meeting someone who shows you their financial planning spreadsheet on a first date and being genuinely excited about it instead of mortified. It's driving a paid-off car that doesn't require you to prove your worth, but just quietly, reliably gets you where you need to go. It's waking up without that low-level anxiety that you're not doing enough, buying enough, being enough for someone whose standards were designed to be impossible to meet. The best revenge is realizing that you didn't need revenge at all, that walking away was its own reward, that choosing yourself over someone else's expectations was actually the healthiest thing you could have done. 3 months later, Rachel and I were still dating, taking things slow and actually getting to know each other instead of rushing towards some predetermined relationship timeline with engagement deadlines and wedding Pinterest boards. She'd never once commented on my car except to say it was sensibly maintained, which might be the sexiest thing anyone has ever said to me. We split checks, planned affordable dates, talked about our financial goals like adults who understood that money was a tool for building security instead of a scorecard for measuring love. She met my friends and actually liked them, didn't try to change my hobbies or suggest I needed to upgrade my wardrobe or hint that my apartment needed expensive furniture to be acceptable. And yeah, I know 3 months isn't that long. Know that I'm probably still recovering from the Mel disaster and shouldn't make any major life decisions. Know that I need to be careful not to just jump into something new because it's different from what I had before. But here's what I also know. Love shouldn't be hard in the ways it was hard with Mel. It shouldn't feel like a constant test you're failing, a job performance review where you never quite meet expectations, a transaction where you're always on the losing end of the negotiation. It should feel easy, comfortable, like coming home after a long day to someone who's genuinely happy to see you not because of what you bought them or where you took them or what you can provide, but just because you're you and that's enough. Standing there in that coffee shop parking lot 2 months ago, watching Rachel drive away in her sensible Civic after exchanging numbers and making plans, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not excitement, exactly, or butterflies, or that anxious rush of new relationship energy. Just this quiet certainty that I'd finally figured out what I was actually looking for, and it had nothing to do with luxury vehicles or expensive weddings or proving my worth through my purchasing power. It had everything to do with finding someone who already understood that the best things in life, love, partnership, genuine connection, can't be bought, can't be financed, can't be upgraded to the deluxe package. They just are, simple and real and infinitely more valuable than any Mercedes could ever be. And my Camry? Still paid off, still reliable, still getting me exactly where I need to go. Understood.